which is something that allows it to entirely flow out of the beaker. But
Okay.
solids cannot flow.
Okay.
There cannot be any force there's no other thing for it to move with it when it reacts. Its reaction cannot inherently drive any other reaction in a part of it, because there's no parts.
Okay. I need you to abandon the idea of a perfect solid because it's not helpful for this discussion.
Okay.
Because I am not arguing for perfect solids. I'm not arguing for a single cube of osmium that is nothing but osmium with no atomic gaps at all. I am arguing for a box made of osmium in which I grab one particle of osmium and it drags every other particle of osmium with it because they are cohesive as a box. Because the object itself is a solid object in which all other particles are affected equally by the one particle you move.
Well, let's say, in our example of osmium,
A better example would probably be rigidity. If we abandon solid, it would be rigid to fluid.
Okay, so I'm gonna say that this still works. So we have a cube of osmium, right?
Yes.
Cohesion is about the ability of the movement of one thing to change anything else. So we have a cube with different particles of osmium, right? I'm going to highlight one particle of osmium. We're going to do this one right here, this one that's kind of up here, right? This piece of osmium is connected to all of the other pieces of osmium, right? Cohesion is about the fact that if I take that one particle of osmium and I move it, right? It will drag every other piece of osmium with it.
Yes.
But because this is a sphere where everything is tightly connected together, I cannot take one piece of osmium and move it. Right? If this is just a sphere, unless I'm like picking it up by this one atom.
Okay.
Thing, I cannot inherently move that atom of osmium. If I were to take a big pool of water and take a drop out of it, I can move a drop. I can act on one drop of water or one bit of that pool of water, right? I am inherently capable of doing an action on it.
I'm going to stop you there. You have wildly diverged from the point.
Go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
The point is not our physical ability to affect individual particles. We are discussing the action of energy on particles, not the ability to remove particles from the whole.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if we can take one piece of osmium and it will affect all other pieces of osmium. The fact is, if a photon hits a piece of osmium, all of the other pieces of osmium will react to the force of that photon the exact same way as if a photon hits a particle of water and all of the other particles of water react the exact same way. The difference is in how rigid the reaction is. Because all force distributes itself equally in the exact same way. The difference is the thing being acted on.
I would say that is hard. I get what you're saying, but I see a flaw in it, of the idea that more boxes here. We're gonna go back to these two boxes, right? The green and the blue one with the dots on them, right?
Okay.
This is our cube of osmium. It's made of different particles of osmium, right? Then photon, yellow little photon, pew, strikes a bit of osmium, right? That osmium takes its reaction and it replicates that reaction through all bits of osmium, right? As it is. Let's say a photon strikes a bit of water. The knocking effect is not that this piece of water then produces a perfect copy of that reaction to each of these bits of water, right? like the osmium, where it strikes one particle and then it replicates that reaction, it distributes it, and all of the osmium has the same reaction, right? The water does
Okay.
not all have the same reaction. Because
Then why are you using symmetrical ripples as an example?
even if these are symmetrical, they're not identical at all points. They happen at different times.
And
Which is-
do you realize what the difference in that timing is?
It's because they're not all...
It's because they are not as cohesive.
Cohesion does not mean the same. It doesn't mean identical.
I'm not saying it does. I'm saying the randomness that introduces those impurities, those unsymmetrical bits. The difference is that the particles of water are not as cohesive as the particles of osmium.
That's not... So the point I've been making about this before is I'm going to point to your cube, right? So you're saying that this cube gets hit by a photon and it propagates out. So that this molecule, the first one we hit, has the same reaction as every other molecule, right?
No.
Or it replicates that force it receives to all the other molecules, right? Or was that...
No, I'm saying for the difference between your elements is how force propagates through them. But force propagates through all objects the exact same way. The only difference is how they react to it. The force of the photon in this case, I used a photon because they always have the same amount of force. There is no variability in how hard a photon is going to hit something. The only difference in the reactivity of the thing it's hitting is, in this case, how the particles connect to each other and react to that force. The osmium absorbs it better because it is a more cohesive object, and therefore the force does not propagate as far, but it propagates the exact same way as it would through water.
I get what you're saying, and I don't disagree, but I don't want to nuke this because he's making a lemonade recipe over there.
Mm-hmm.
He's over here. Well, yeah, you got lemons. It's strawberry lemonade. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Okay, so it's that if this is our box of osmium, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is our box. I'm not even going to bother coloring it in. And this is our photon, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the force introduced to our system.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. That the box of osmium will, in a way, have the same kind of reaction as the water, where it propagates out in the kind of ripple way, because, again, that molecule of osmium will then push all other molecules of osmium because they're all connected to each other with a very force. And so it'll ripple out. But what I'm saying is that what is important is that the overall effect on this osmium, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were to look at it on like a physical scale, like if you do in a physics example, you were to shrink it down to a point, you could say that the overall reaction, the only important thing is that reacts to this osmium is that it's experiencing a force driving it that way, right? That's an arrow pointing that way.
Yeah.
These are... That's the rough thing. I'm saying that with a bit of water, right? Because it's not rigid, because it does not have the same rigidity, you cannot do in the case, which you can do in the case of osmium, but you cannot do here, is that point formation. You cannot isolate this to a point, because this is not rigid. This water can, and often will, expand. It gets hit by a force, and it does this. And it does this a little bit, right? This is not due to a lack of cohesion. This is due to different properties. But the important thing here is that, well, you're right. One force introduced to either thing will affect that force, and it will propagate throughout each force, and each particle will drag and force each other particle. But I'm saying what's important, and the distinction is that, well, for this, solid, I can isolate it and pretend it's this point because it is a solid, it has a rigid structure. That while I can isolate this to a point, and I can, for any solid in any reasonable physics example, say that I am going to take that mass and convert it into a point and analyze the forces on that point. It is impossible to do that with water. But you can't say that the water does not all in one way react. Each molecule of water is reacting to the force of each other molecule of water. But it is not a contained reaction. It is a reaction that is allowed to propagate in any way that it pleases. As opposed to a solid, which is rigid. And while it does, in a way, propagate, it can't move at all. Like, you get some force between the molecules, but they are in no way allowed to move or shift. Other than for that moment. Because the water cannot be defined by a single point, it is impossible to define it and close it off in volume and shape and everything because it is compressible, which you say solids are not. Because in physics, you generally say, to simplify problems, for like pure problems, that solids are non-compressible.
Yes, but I'm not simplifying here.
I know. I'm saying you're not simplifying, you're right. But it's a matter of saying that when all is said and done, what reaction has the osmium experienced? Is it any different from where it started as a cube?
Yes. It might not be noticeable, but it is different. Because every action has equal and opposite reactions, so there is no way that the photon can hit it and not have some effect on it.
Yes, but that force, but would you agree that that force, like the summation of all of the things that is doing, could be summarized as this point?
Yes.
That is my reason for drawing the distinction. Because if you can simplify it to a point, with a solid, what you're expanding on there is the fact that it is rigid and that the particles have a reasonable structure, which, in totality, the total response to a force does not in any way change. The molecule that's next to a different molecule is going to stay the molecule next to that same molecule.
Yes.
But the idea with the water is that while the molecules change, you can take a molecule of water before a reaction and say that it is not next to the same molecules it was at after that reaction, but it still had an effect on those molecules after. In the same way the solid, all molecules will react. The water is doing that. Each molecule will have a reaction to any response that affects one molecule. In the same way the solid will. But it is not defined by the fact that it's rigid. Because yes, rigid solids do experience and exhibit cohesion, which is why rigidity or the earth element and the water element are related to each other and they're relatively useful elements. But again, at that point, you're not analyzing that it's cohesive for cohesion's sake. You're saying that it's rigid, and because it's rigid, it has cohesion. It's an extra specification. Rigidity does create cohesion, but cohesion also exists on its own. And so as an expression of pure cohesion, water serves as a better example because it's not cohesion because of rigidity, it is simply cohesion. The two do not need to exist together. They can be separated. And while one exhibits a principle of the other, Earth does contain that. Water contains one without the other, which makes it a better example to be used as your this is this. For saying that this element is the natural expression of pure cohesion without being caused by something else.
Okay, but we have ultimately wrapped back around to my original problem. Using the definition you have just laid out, without introducing any other physics, chemistry, or philosophy, what is the difference between water and wind?
Difference is that while neither of them possess any rigidity, I already said rigidity, they don't possess rigidity, that's not adding to any definition, right? Is that fair? That they exhibit the pure entirency of cohesion, where any single act upon one bit of it will propagate and act throughout all bits of it. While wind, on the other hand, is not that. wind, if you impact a single molecule of air, it will not drag every other molecule next to it around with it. Which is, again, what I was saying about water, so it's not an extra inclusion. That air, the molecules are non-cohesive. They do not drag or act on each other inherently. Well, in water, I'm going to draw something here, but it's not adding to anything. If I have 3 molecules of water here, I apply a force to this one. It applies that force to this next one, right? And so this one has a force. Water will inherently create a force driving this third particle. Even though they're not technically attached to each other, there's cohesion there, so all 3 will move together. If I have wind here, which I'll draw in orange for an example, these 3 particles, if this particle strikes this particle, it will send it forward, it will hit this particle, and it will move these forward. Nothing will happen to this third particle. There's no cohesion there with which to drive an additional response. In water, that is absolute. If you drop something, if you place a drop in the ocean, it will send a ripple that, while weakly, will reach across the entire ocean. If you send a gust of wind, it will affect the wind around it, any other particles it randomly bumps into, but it will not affect the entire atmosphere. It is not cohesive to that degree. It is not cohesive at all. Aside from physical pushing, physical bumping of air molecules, there's not an inherent drag of those molecules together. That is the difference. That is why the 2 elements are opposed. As wind versus water. Wind is a response in air that is entirely non-cohesive. Water is, as a thing, exists entirely cohesive. That is my definition.
And anyone who has ever used thunder damage will know that that's completely bullcrap. Because thunder damage relies on wind acting the exact same way as the water. It relies on the cohesion to create a pressure wave.
Yes. But that is a cone, not a sphere. That is... more dots. We need more dots. We need more dots. Dot 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 dot. Okay. So we have something that strikes a dot like this. That dot perches out and it strikes this dot. This dot then bounces off this dot right next to it because it does have some momentum going that way, forcing this dot this way. But it continues on to strike this dot. Both of these dots are now moving. This one hits this one, which inherently hits both of these dots, which hits these 3 dots, which move these 3 dots in that dot. And again, it's branching out, and it is creating a conical formation, right? But these dots don't get hit by anything. They do not move in that direction. They just stand still. If you have water... This inherent force will drag all of them. It will push and drag all molecules out in all directions. There'll be a general trend towards the direction you're going. Because again, things are being dragged. But the amount of energy lost by those things having to be dragged along, and also those things being pushed out to the sides, because again, when you have a wave, it will push, but that push will create outward forces, which branch outward more. The amount of energy lost there is so great that you would have no effective damage by the time you reach the conclusion. While with air, you're right, it does spread out, right? Because molecules will randomly bump into each other. They're not all in lines, they're a random mess of them. So it does spread, but that spread is through contact, not cohesion. Molecules hitting other molecules. In water, a pressure wave drags a current behind it, right? Like a wave. Where that wave will tip up, then back down, and then pull in.
Yes.
While in the case of thunder damage, or a thunder wave, you're not doing that. It's
Yes, you
pure.
are. Not in the same way, but you're doing the exact same thing, and it's for the exact same reason that waves drag other currents behind them.
It is. But it's to a much weaker degree. And it could be said that that is inherently driven by the real world. Because what's causing that is the process of diffusion. In water, the primary causing force of that is the idea that molecules have cohesion to each other and so they drag each other. But what's causing that in air is there is cohesion which is doing that, because there's cohesion in everything, because it's the real world, right? So air is even cohesive to itself. But the issue is then that this space where all of these molecules are moving from, right? So this is our initial example. Then after the cone we have these molecules that were left behind are still there. These molecules that were left behind are still there. But we have a large cone where all of the molecules have been pushed forwards in order to create sound. These molecules have molecules behind them. And because they repel each other, and because all molecules like technically repel each other and things like that, they will want to move into this empty space, which will create a back current. But that is not necessarily that's not necessarily the same as cohesion. That's a real-world physical thing that results from diffusion into empty space and equilibrium of pressure. Because by inherently moving things out of a space, you're creating an area of low pressure.
And how is a 15th century German from wizard school supposed to determine that these two identical phenomena are caused by different things?
They're not, because in order to experience this phenomenon in any really major effect, you need to get really fast. To create when you start to account for things like drag and things like that, you're accounting for that when you have things like cars and planes. Things that are moving so fast that there's not time for a natural cause of diffusion, so it creates a vacuum effect physically pulling things back into it, where this space not only allows these things to diffuse in, but because there's a void here, these molecules that were already pushed are then drawn backwards into the empty space.
I'm aware of that. I am aware of all of this.
So my explanation is that 15th century physics man is playing with water more than he's playing with air. Because while air pushes, you don't necessarily see or consider all of the massive currents that then result as backflows because of the movement of air and pressure diffusion. Even though diffusion is what primarily leads to air currents, it's that you can touch water and see it ripple. You don't smack air and then feel your hand drawn back by a vacuum.
But if you swing your hand fast enough, you do feel the drag.
You do feel the drag. But you don't feel... You feel resistance. You don't necessarily feel a force backwards. Although technically that is what resistance means, but you don't feel that...
That's exactly what resistance means. And if you swing your hand in water, you don't feel a force backwards. You feel a larger amount of resistance.
Forward, yeah. But that resistance... But moving your hand through air at any speed doesn't... Just at like a normal speed of just interacting with things, like raising a pen, doesn't cause that effect. It's... I was gonna say, it doesn't cause that effect in air, but in water it does. There's other effects at play in the real world, like drag and things like that, but those aren't necessarily cohesive effects. Those aren't the effects of cohesion. Those are effects of diffusion. Which, you're right, water also plays into, but we have examples of water's cohesive force as something that's important because physically, we're going to talk about the physical world for a second, we have examples, like how water will bubble up onto something and form a bubble despite its edges. air doesn't naturally bubble into things. It doesn't naturally form any kind of cohesive barrier or stopgate. Well, water does, which is the inherent difference. Yeah, if you, like, remove all the air from a bottle, it will want to suck the air back in, which is a resistant force to you doing something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that force is not due to the air attaching to other bits of air. And even
Right.
if you do have this force, like this force of things rushing in, that still doesn't draw out the impact of a ripple throughout the entire atmosphere, the same way a ripple through water will affect the entire ocean. Because at some point, the air molecules, which aren't attracted to each other, will stabilize a few feet out. Eventually, the diffusion will stop moving things, while the cohesion that pushes and pulls things is a stronger and more inherent force. Like, yeah, if I smack my hand through the air really fast, I can feel the drag, right?
Mm-hmm.
But someone across the room can't feel that drag. If I rush my arm through the water, that ripple of water will get to that other person. So yeah, you can
Alright.
uh,
I'm gonna be honest. I'm just getting really tired of reiterating the same 15 points. Ultimately, my point is, if we have to get into particle physics to explain why two things are different from each other, we should have a more intuitive example.
And my argument is that it's not particle physics that we need to get into to explain this. It's particle physics we need to get into to explain the highly contextual examples of what this is and what this isn't. In order to understand what it is on an inherent level, it's the same example. If I smack my arm to the point where I can feel resistance, only I feel that. If I hit my hand into a body of water, anyone else within that body of water will feel the reaction. In the water,
That's a good example, except you're ignoring the fact that the person on the other end of the room will feel a light breeze if you swing your hand hard enough to feel resistance.
a very, very well. Are they a no? That depends on the fucking position in which you are when you're swinging your hand.
So the difference isn't reactionality; it's directionality.
Yes, a cohesive reaction is independent of all direction. It reacts across all directions. A reaction which is non-cohesive reacts directionally and purely directionally. For instance, if I was this black dot and I swung my hand this way, if you were over here, you would feel a wind you would feel some wind rushing towards your face. If you were over here, you might feel a gust of wind going past you as air goes in to feel over here. But if you were over here, you would not feel it. You wouldn't feel anything. If this was in water...
That also depends, because if you swing your arm hard enough for air to start feeling like water, everyone is going to feel the ripples.
It does. But that's hard to do. And that gets into examples of going really, really, really fast.
Which doesn't matter, because we are treating the particles as if they are equivalent to each other.
No, because we're not talking about particles here. We're not talking about particles here. We're talking about someone figuring out this example. Like someone using this as an example to figure out and understand the difference.
And I'm saying that people who have access to thunder damage but don't go sailing wouldn't find this very intuitive.
I guess you're right, because of the way thunder damage works in D&D.
The only differences between these two elements are differences that you can only prove at a basic particle level. So, again, it's the language. If we call these wind and water, at the level on which they behave differently, we have far exceeded the technological and scientific principles of your setting.
Yeah, but also no. Because my argument is that you're right. The explainable, highly contextual differences of this come at the particle level, but that there is also, at the easiest level of comprehension, right? Like your basic classroom example, there are also things that you can clearly see and demonstrate this with. Because again, you're talking about thunder damage, and I'm talking about like someone learning about this, right? Like a wizard playing around in their room with this and the forces of elements, right? Your example is if I'm doing like a massive burst of thunder damage to a group of people. That is not a like child level understanding example like the kid science we see at those at the places we went, right? Talking about like how you can create a large group of thunder damage which echoes out through the air like an echo chamber. That is not the same as a classroom example. But me standing somewhere and pushing wind at my friend and him feeling like how I slapped my hand if he's in ahead of or behind me, but not a piece to the side of me, that's a classroom example. And I can go in a classroom and tank a tank of water and say, poke over here. Everywhere feels that reaction. Poke over here. Even everywhere feels that reaction. Unlike where only the person ahead of you or behind you felt the reaction of you pushing your hand, pushing around air, anywhere you poke in that tank of water, every other part of that water will feel that reaction. That's like a classroom example. If you want to go into the properties of dealing damage with thunder, that goes into the idea that thunder is not purely, it is very much not purely wind damage. It is wind and lightning damage, which has other properties. So it is being augmented. So thunder damage, I don't think you could say is irrelevant to this example, which is, you know what, fair. I've also been using it in this example, which, you're right, it's not relevant, I don't think, now. But in terms of like a classroom example, where you're not actually casting a spell and you're examining either the basic physics, the basic mana principles, like basic physics principles of mana, an example in the real world, or the really nitty-gritty particle physics level of things, I'm arguing that you'd be able to see these similar results. Unless you did something like cast a large thunder spell, or cast a large wind spell in an enclosed room.
Which it would not take very long for someone to do.
It would not. But then you can explain things like the fact that if it's an enclosed room, the wind is doing that because then the wind is bouncing everywhere. Because you don't have proper room for the wind to be let out.
And what I'm saying is the confusion comes from the fact it's called wind and water, instead of some other more intuitive example that captures what you're actually trying to describe, because wind and water are fundamentally, observably, the same thing.
They
Any
are.
Any amount of science applied to this, which will reveal the behavior of water, will equally reveal the same behavior in wind. And the only way to be able to distinguish a difference is to get down to the particle level like you did. There is no level of science where these things look like they do two different things, but don't also look like they behave the exact same way. Like, we arrived originally at the theory that air wasn't air. There was something between all of the nothingness called ether, because we were trying to explain the fact that air behaved like water despite not looking like water. Just intuitively, there is no way to arrive at that conclusion scientifically without also interrogating it far enough to find out why they are different. I'm not arguing that you're wrong. I'm arguing that the story you ripped this from really needed to define its language better, because this annoys me.
I'm gonna say, if I may make a closing statement, because we've been doing this long enough, so
yeah,
I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree at some point. So I think that's gonna be easy. My argument is that it isn't the elements of... You're right. Air is a fluid. Air behaves like water. But we are not trying to argue that it is air that is the element. It is that wind is the element. That the reaction of wind, independent of of air that's moving through, is different than the reaction of water in general. That is the difference. And when you get down to forces of magic, that difference will make itself relevant again. Because
so then
yes,
have...
at the particle level, there's a difference between moving wind and moving water. And yes, on the childhood story table difference, there is a difference. There's a difference between wind and water. But there's a difference but when you start to get physical and involve physics, I'm going to say quote unquote physics here because we're talking about real world physics, not magical physics.
Mhm.
There is no difference between air and water. But in the world of magic, in terms of magical energy of wind and water, there is a difference. Because the reputable difference is between the magical forces, not between pure air and pure water, which you're right are both fluids. So on the particle level, wind behaves different than water. On the classroom example level, it behaves different than wind and water. And in the interim, where you're saying that we invented ether and all that to explain it, there's actual magic, and there are magical principles and magical examples you can do with the pure energies of wind and water that would yield the same results as the particle in the classroom level to fill in that gap. That is my point.
Alright.
Those are my closing statements. You are free to make yours.
My closing statements are that your arguments are all valid and everything you have said is correct, but defining it as wind and water is objectively incorrect for two reasons. Because wind and water, wind, quote-unquote, and water are two separate things. One is the expression of force, and the other is a physical thing that have no correlation to each other, and therefore muddle the conversation anytime you try and talk about it. And two, because if you replace wind with its logical component, air, which is, you've done that, I've done that, we just do it by accident while we're talking about it, then we get into the problem of the two examples are not sufficiently different to create a logical conclusion as to what we're talking about.
Alright. Is that just your first one, or is that both points?
That's both points.
Alright. With that, I think we will agree to disagree, and yield. And we will look at the face Hef made. It's a very nice face.
I helped.
Yeah,
you have, and it's all been wonderful. I'm sorry.
I've had it on the screen. I've just been looking at it. I haven't been playing a game or anything.
That's fair.
Our discussion
That's
about
unfortunate.
the elements.
Please upload it to YouTube so actual scientists can roast both of us.
First, let me give to this list the entire list of elements so that they can argue about them, and their diametrically opposedness. The whole list is.
I have the list in front of me so that I could have this argument.
It's heat and cold, dark and light, lightning and earth, wind and water, mind and force, space and gravity, cure and scourge. Scourge, yes. Which is like an energy that harms or curses or debilitates or breaks down. So cure is like energy that build up and restores, while scourge is things that break down and degrade. So cure is healing magic, scourge is death magic or curse magic or necromancy. Although necromancy is a weird thing where it deals with both of them, because you are using necrotic energies to heal other things in exchanges, but wizards get to break the rules because wizards are dumb.
I will add additional context to this. This argument arose because I argue that the only elements on that list that have no logical or intuitive progression from one to the other are wind and water. Because the idea is that every spell exists on some scale between some of the elements, or some combination of them.
Yeah, it's
So
a combination.
if you have hold on. If you have a thing that is cold, you make it hot by adding heat basically you add hot mana to it and it becomes hot. And your ideal is to balance all of these things perfectly in the middle, which means there needs to be a sliding scale from one to the other. And the only element in this list that does not have an intuitive sliding scale is wind and water.
And I'm saying that there's inherent... The scale thing's a bit strange. I'm not sure where that plays into. But in
That's
terms of
what
how
you
these...
told me last night at D&D.
I don't remember that. I might have said that. I don't
It's an
remember
ultra simplified version of exactly what you said, which is that your goal is to balance hot and cold, light and dark, mind and force in order to create pure mana. You cannot have pure mana if they are out of balance.
Okay, it's to combine them all, or the idea is that all of these forms of energy are inherent to the ultimate form of energy, which is mana or magical energy. That magical energy contains all of these elements as basic components, and that while mana is the overall term for these things existing, that they react, that these elements are opposed things which make up mana, which kind of react or oppose each other. So pure mana is said to contain a bit of each of these elements, not necessarily like next to each other, but all just kind of together. And that the reason that elements are diametrically opposed is because if you were to break down mana into these elements and put these elements together in a vacuum, they would not combine, or they would fizzle out, or they would have some kind of inherent inability to coexist. Hot and cold are naturally opposed, one of which is the lack of energy, one of which is energy, right? Because that's what it is. Like, heat is the release of energy from something, cold is the absorbing of energy into something. If you combine those two, they create nothing. Like, the heat is just absorbed and dissipated. Light and dark. Those two are diametrically opposed. If you combine light and dark, you get, like, nothing, or kind of shades of gray. The energies will kind of consume each other. The light will light up the darkness, and then you'll be left with nothing. Lightning and earth, one of which represents the chaotic expression of energy, one of which represents absolute stability and rigidity. So when lightning strikes earth, it dissipates the energy. They fizzle out, they kind of stop. The earth might be broken up, or disordered, or transformed, but the energies are gone. Wind and water is the one we've had this discussion about, which I'm explaining as cohesion versus non-cohesion. They are separable because they are different elements because they are entirely unmixable. You cannot put air and water together. They will naturally separate. They cannot combine in any way like oil and water. You can put them together. You can kind of shake them up so that they're little pockets of oil in the water, but they will never inherently combine. They are a form of absolute cohesion versus a form of no cohesion in terms of energy, and they are things that are absolutely incombinable. Force and mind are opposed because one affects only the body and one affects the other. They are entirely incombinable in the same way water and wind are. You can't combine them to do anything or have effects that affect both of them. They're just entirely opposed things that cannot combine. Space and gravity are the same, one of which represents attraction and movement, one of which is absolute position and translation. So space magic is things like teleportation, which require an absolute position and shift things. Gravity is attraction, forces that move and redirect. Which again is opposed to absolute position. You can't have the both of them. I mean, in terms of like movement you do, but in terms of like magical forces, you can't put the two together to create an effect. Cure and Scourge cancel each other out. You have restorative energy and curse and energy that destroys. You put them both on something, nothing happens to that thing. And those are the elements. Some are like combined or together or fit well together, like you would have earth, water, and cold fitting together, which is cold, the lack of energy, or the integration of energy, like pulling energy in because it has none. Water, which is something that is entirely cohesive, but not rigid. And then earth, which is rigidity and order, since earth or solids are entirely and completely ordered. They are crystalline. So things like that would go together well, while things like wind, lightning, and heat would go together because they're all expressions of energy. Energy breeds entropy. That's kind of like that's just physically how it works. If you have energy, it leads to entropy. Things trend towards more entropy. But that usually requires energy. And that's the elements and the whole thing. And they seem to have, other than a snafu about using force to describe something before, we've mostly gotten past this. And the only one we're arguing about now is wind and water, as being kind of, it's not air and water, but at the same time, the reason why they're diametrically opposed and the reason why they are inherently separable, like that they can't combine, is kind of unlinked together, which is, I think, one of the issues here. It's about the difference between them is about cohesion. But these represent like absolutes. So you're using the energy of absolute heat or the energy of absolute cold in order to create a spell, because you are putting that thing out into the world. Mana is an energy source that is then expressed into the world. So if you express Cure Mana, you are healing something. If you express Scourge Mana, you are doing something. You cannot express them together. That does nothing. Again, the environment neutralizes. It has expressions of all things, so you'll have areas that are hot, areas that are cold, and then those things will meet in places and create areas that are neutral. So if theoretically all of the heat and all of the cold mana is being expressed in the same place, it'll be a nice neutral temperature. But then at places like volcanoes, you will have an excess of cold mana that is non-expressed and just kind of around to be used for spells and things, because all of the heat is being expressed, none of the cold is being expressed, resulting in a much, much hotter place.
And ultimately, my only problem with any of this is that he has to resort to particle physics to solve a simple semantic problem.
Bro, I didn't resort to particle physics because I needed them. I resorted to particle physics because I like particle physics.
I'm aware of that, but at the point where you keep saying we need to disregard physical examples, but you're also saying that wind and water can't combine because air and water form bubbles, you have a problem you need to solve.
Look, man, it's not my system. I'm just fucking vibing here and trying to run a D&D campaign. I've spent the requisite number of hours out of campaign doing prep and examples of this.
You're doing a wonderful job. I'm not criticizing you. I'm criticizing the idiot who came up with this system.
It is what it is.
And also, you literally put me in college and told me to ask a question. I'm not sure what else you expected.
I did, but you asked a question that relates to particle physics in an inherent way, because technically, if you want to get to the pure examples of all of this, you isolate a particle, like a perfect particle, and then you talk about what these energies do to that particle. And that's the purest, most unadulterated effect of that thing. But some of them require multiple particles, and then expressions of those particles. Anyway, I gotta go take a fucking piss. I'll be back.
Have fun, don't die. I'm gonna go kill some terrorists.
And then I'm probably also gonna go kill some terrorists. Or play Minecraft, I don't know.
Fair enough.
I'll be back.
Valid. You're doing a really good job, by the way. I appreciate it. So all of this spawned because apparently I'm a furry now, but anyway. Swampy happened, frankly. The context for this is I made a lot... Okay, I've had... I can't say they've been the worst 3 weeks of my life, because obviously December happened, but since December, life has just completely fallen apart and taken a head at the last 3 weeks. And I am not okay. But last week we had a D&D session, which is basically therapy to me. So when I'm given a character who I can make jokes about, I will make jokes about that character shamelessly. In this case, that character was a 12-foot-tall lion man who dragged a former member of our party out of the city in chains. Formally owning said former member of the party. So I made a lot of jokes, right? Like a lot of jokes. And then proceeded to suffocate myself laughing for about 15 minutes while it was my turn in combat after that diversion. I then walk into my Introduction to Magical Principles class, and my professor is a tabaxi in a suit. I need you to understand the state of my brain right now. I was then Swampy deliberately called me out, told me to ask a question, and that single question has devolved into a discussion of particle physics. And quantum theory, and also, what was the other one? Philosophy. It's going well. How are you? Good. Shame. I suffer. But I suffer for art, so it's mostly okay. I feel that. I'm sorry, that just sunk in. That is a painfully raw line, my guy. That took a second to sink in. Also, I feel that in my soul, but you didn't have to shoot me in the heart like that. Like, bruh. Yeah. I don't relate to you on that level, but I relate to you on every level, you know? I feel you. Oh, he has a sausage, that's what he's got. So they added a new operator to Siege. I think he's actually really, really cool, but I think he might be the first operator I've ever seen get added in a long time, where people straight up do not know how to use him. Like, not in a they're bad at playing him kind of way, but in a I have yet to see a single casual player play him correctly or win with him. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Like, he has really good guns, and I think he's got the coolest new gadget to be added in a very long time. I just don't see people using him, like, at all. Or when they do use him, they're usually very dead very quickly. No, I think he's perfectly fine. I think people just need to get their crap together. But, yeah, pretty much. So, like, the idea... are you familiar with Valorant? Okay, so he has a very... Okay. He has a very Valorant-like ability. Where he has 5 mines he can put down. He's a defender. And each of those mines has a, I believe, 10-foot effective radius. He has to manually activate them, but he can track them through walls and across the map, so you don't have to be close to them to activate them. And when you activate them, it takes a second and a half for it to start leaking out a gas that doesn't blind your opponents, it nearsights them like in Valorant, so you can only see about 5 meters in front of you. That's really freaking cool. So, I've just described to you an exceptionally powerful ability. Remember also that I led with casuals don't know how to use him because they keep dying with him.
Also, I have to ask. I have to make a comment, if I may. I'll let you finish,
Okay.
but have a comment.
Go for it.
It's funny because you're right, Pancake. It's kind of stupid, but you know what's even funnier?
What?
My thing explains D&D better than any other example. You know why?
Why?
Because all water magic in D&D does not require that you have a medium already there, but wind magic shouldn't work in a vacuum.
This is correct.
So basically the idea is that water magic, it uses mana to create the water, which is why it's a form, not an intermediate, and then wind uses the air around you to push through it. And also, as for thunder damage, I can explain how that works too. You know why?
Why?
Because the source of the thunder in like things like Thunder Wave or the Cube or like Cube attacks of thunder. Do you know where the thunder comes from?
Where does it come from?
It comes from the outside edges of the box in. It doesn't come from the inside out.
I disagree, but I know where you're coming from.
No, I'm saying if that happens, you can explain all the damage.
Then why does Thunderwave knock people away from the center?
Cause it's targeted towards people?
It's not targeted towards people, it's a dome that forces everything that can move out of it.
You don't say it's targeted, but you imply that it's targeted. You imply that the thunder, specifically, like lines, branches out to any target in the sphere.
No, it's very specifically a dome that forces every object out of that dome.
I know. I'm trying. I'm working. I haven't seen the spell. I'm working with what I got here, buddy. It's not going to explain every spell, but it'll explain enough of them.
I mean, you're not wrong. I'm not asking you cover for every contingency, but like thunder damage is very specifically sound damage.
I know. And sometimes you need a little extra oomph to help the sound damage go. You know.
Fair.
Because again, those spells like Thunder Wave might include additional elements beyond just thunder. They might include something else that helps do that. But you can explain. But that's the beauty of the system. The beauty of the system is that you can use whatever you have. Gravity. Thunderwave is gravity. It attracts the pressure waves to any targets. The pressure waves are sent out wildly, but it curves them in towards any target.
It's so much easier to just explain as a dome of outward pressure.
It would be. But my thing helps me explain other spells better. No system is going to explain every spell perfectly.
And I'm not saying that you in any way have failed, but you're arguing from a terrible position. Because the person you stole this from set you up for failure.
They did, but I will run with it and I will force it to work.
You're more than welcome to.
Because it works well enough.
I won't stop you. Just understand that Victoria will be very confused because I am very confused because this is very dumb.
Then it will make it even more beautiful when I give you homework. Like actual homework.
I know. I can't wait.
Because you know what the first homework assignment is going to be?
I can't possibly guess.
It's going to be taking spells and classifying them by their elements.
Good. You know my real problem? Genuinely my real problem with this nomenclature?
Yes?
Is that defining this particular aspect of spells as wind and water, or even air and water, like using physical examples for what you are trying to describe, makes them completely useless as tools to describe anything.
Correct.
That's the worst part, because once you attach that concept to a physical thing, it no longer works on any level.
Pancake, and you know what's the fun bit about that? That's exactly how science works in the real world.
I know, and I'm arguing that this is fantasy, so it should make sense.
It...
Because The reason science doesn't make sense is because we're not making it up.
It does. Yeah, you're right. It's because we're not making it up. But in order to have any kind of understanding, you need to ignore a lot of things that are inherent. Like a lot
Only
of
sometimes.
things that exist. No. Like in most cases, like the idea of simplifying an object down to a point, which is one of
Yes.
the most basic things in physics in order to do any understanding of forces. It's how you learn forces. It requires an additional. That's physics 1, right? Like a point force, right? A point mass.
I have taken up to physics 2. I understand this.
No, Pancake. Because do you know what is the next 2 classes in the physics track? Statics and dynamics, which is when you can't analyze things down to a point force in any capacity, because you're understanding the internal stresses and strains.
I know. I have done it.
Clap, 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 clap. Welcome to suffering. Welcome to college.
I'm not even in. I have never been to college in my life.
I know, Pancake, but now you're in college because I'm making magical college suck just as much as real college does.
Just to actually mess with you. I am going to get into college now. I am going to go to actual college just to come back and say you were wrong about literally everything you said, and I can prove it.
I was wrong. I'm definitely wrong about some things. I'm not perfect, but I've taken a good bit of physics and a good bit of chemistry and a good bit of all of this.
I know.
I'm speaking with Calc 4 behind my back. I didn't understand Calc 4, but it's on my side.
The problem is it's not on your side, because you don't understand it well enough to explain it.
No one knows anything well enough to explain it in physics.
I know.
Ridiculous.
That's why I can come back and say everything you said was definitively wrong, because if I take up to your level of physics, I will obviously be able to come up with some equation and some proof that proves you wrong, because none of us know how this works.
Do it, bitch, you won't. Do it. Go to real college to prove my D&D setting incorrect.
The scary thing is I'm considering it.
Alright, let's play some fucking Siege.
I need to take a bio break. I'll be right back.
Hey, Hef, how's it going? Don't worry, I did it.
By the way, I love you, Hef. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, apologies for just, like, ranting around you, Hef. It's always nice seeing you. It's always nice hanging out. But look, I've done it. I convinced Pancake to get further education. Let's go! He barely got his GED. I've convinced him to do college. I'm the life coach now. I'm doing it. I'm making him get further education out of spite. It's really funny because I was talking with. Has Pancake told you his plans to come eat my food? Pancake is coming to my house at some point to stay for an extended period of time, or that's the plan. And I was talking to my. I'll tell I'll tell this when Pancake gets back. How's Tears of the Kingdom been treating you? Yeah. Pancake's on here, so I don't mind. I know. I've seen most of it. Yeah, there's 3 layers. Underground, sky, overworld. Mm-hmm. 125 of each, yes. They are. I think. I might be hearing wrong. Well, if you notice, they're all together. Like a light root is directly under a shrine. Mm-hmm. I haven't played it. I haven't actually played it, so I don't know all the specifics. But fair. Yes. Oh, no, I meant like the shrine finder function. I don't know about that. Some of them might be story related. But you're not really in the mid game, are you? You're not really in the mid. You said you were in the mid game. Fair enough. I wouldn't call that the mid game, but to each their own. I call that like late game because you're prepping to go beat the final boss by running around. Fair enough. Yeah, some of them might be parts of like the ones that you're missing might be parts of quests. As for like getting the light roots that are below them, I don't know much about that. I've seen like a few speedruns of the game and a challenge run and a guy's general playthrough. Actually, I should finish watching. You probably, yeah, because I watched Point Crow's playthrough of the game. I watched Small Ant's first two videos about it, and then he did a speed run, which I watched, or like a challenge run, which I watched. So I've seen most of the game. Um, Battery power ups and stuff. Also, yeah. But here's the little just thing for you. Once your batteries are all in, like you've got all the green batteries, you can upgrade them to blue, and they hold more charge. So just so you know, once you've upgraded your batteries, like you filled out the battery thing, you can still get more batteries. I don't think it gives you more like actual batteries. I think it just gives you more charge in each battery, like a longer duration. But again, I haven't done much with it. Hmm. I think so, yeah. And then it leads to another, and then it leads to another, yeah. Hmm. Describe it to me. I wouldn't look things up. Like, is it like a reptile? Is it like a Hinox? Is it a... The thing... no. But I know what you're talking about. The ones that are, like, just a bunch of hands that kind of grab you. They're made of gloom and they reduce your maximum HP. Yeah, like once you beat them, there's a phantom again that shows up. Also, when Pancake gets back, you're gonna have to stop talking because Pancake doesn't want spoilers. I don't mind because you know when I played Breath of the Wild, I played it like literally 4 years after it came out. I'm like, bro, Tears of the Kingdom. I'm really happy that they improved enemy variety because that was like the biggest thing about Breath of the Wild that I didn't like. Is that there's like 4 types of enemies. Oh yeah, I imagine. Companion with an ability, yeah. That's kind of funny. How many followers do you have? I'm gonna say nothing here. Unless you ask me to say something. Fair enough. I don't know where, like, okay. I don't remember where you look for that. Pancake? I don't know if Pancake's back. It's the... I think it's a place called the, Construct Factory, isn't it? I don't know, man. I have no idea. Again, I haven't played through it, so I don't know. I just know. Have you collected all the memories? Okay, the dragon tears are the memories, I think. So you know the thing about the Master Sword, right? Well, where did you pick it up? Okay, yeah, you know it's Dragon Silver. That's the thing. That's like the big spoiler. That's Dragon Silver.
I'm back.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna stop talking.
Alright, what's up?
We're talking about spoilers, so we're gonna stop.
Spoilers for what?
Tears of the Kingdom.
Okay, got it.
You know you don't
All
want to
right.
talk. No more talking.
Yep. I appreciate it. Alright, I have...
As to your last point, I don't really know how to help you. Again, I haven't played it. I don't know any of the areas where you would need to go for those kinds of things. But I wish you luck, Hat.
I also wish you luck.
Yeah, this game it's got a lot more story, so I just recommend following the story. I'm sure you'll find what you're looking for.
Alright,
Somewhere in the story.
I am prepared for whatever other crap tonight pulls out. I don't have to work tomorrow. I have cheesecake that is only 2 weeks old, and I have alcohol, a completely unknown quantity of it.
What kind?
I made a White Russian, but I forgot to bring my measuring cup upstairs, so I just eyeballed it.
Fair enough.
We do. I have had exactly one full meal today. This is gonna go great. Swampy, I am send invite if you want.
I'm in a T-Hunt. I'll probably be dead
Okay.
soon.
Okay.
I got 16 enemies once, which I'm happy about. I'm bad at T-Hunt.
What are you doing?
Just Bartlett U, easy. Or normal.
Ah.
As
Okay.
Glass.
As you should. Except you play a lot of glass.
Well, I like Glads on T-Hunt.
But I can't fault you for that.
Because T-Hunt has a lot of terrorists, and if you don't notice one of them, you're fucking dead immediately. So I like Glass because I can two-tap them.
Or like, that was less a statement about you playing him a lot in T-Hunt and more a lot about you playing him a lot in T-Hunt and in regular Siege. I don't know what it feels like on your end, but I feel like you are burning out. Like, it feels like that to me. You've got that vibe.
Well, it's more I am, like, shit at seeing people.
That's fair.
And I like the aimbot.
Understandable.
I also like blowing people up, and he has grenades.
Can't fault you for that one.
None of the other people I usually play have grenades, and I find explosive kills some of the most... You've seen how how giddy I get.
Oh yeah, I know. C4 kill with the cap can to win the round.
Fucking yeah, that was a fucking funny one.
That was the best part of that was the most try-hard nomad we have ever seen.
Yeah,
And you just C4'd her from across the room. You know what? No, actually, I'm gonna see if I have the replay of that still, if I can stream it for half, because that was... Now that I've said it, I need someone else to see it.
I was sitting on Cam's most round doing CopCon. I got a bunch of CopCon hits, and then I'm tucked down behind this washing machine. Someone's shooting at me. They're like, I have a minor firefight with them, and then I just huck a C4 over the washing machine and blow them up.
Like, completely blind C4. It was great.
Yeah, I just hucked it over the washing machine in their general direction of bullet lines, and they just instantly died. And then
I
they
think they got
ranted.
salty in chat too.
They did get salty in chat, like, bro, I didn't even see that. Like him. Oh shit! I accidentally went for another round. Guess I gotta die.
Fair. Now I really wish I hadn't eyeballed that, because that